Hola, Rosa. Gracias por tu invitación. Thanks for your invitation. I'm going to share my screen. Well, the topic that you asked me to develop a little bit was neoliberalism and education. It's part of the history and philosophy education course. I'm going to share with you and the students a critical view from Brazil. My name is Naumar Almeida Filho, and I'm at the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of São Paulo, Brazil, but originally I'm from the Federal University of Bahia in the northeast of our state. The topic is quite complex, and I think that we should think that it's a global context defined by crisis. There is a crisis in the economy, an eternal social crisis, a crisis of the state, at least the state, the form of the state as we know of today, and of course, a crisis in the education as a mostly kind of a historical humanistic project, and as a background, I would say there is a crisis of the subject of knowledge, both meanings of subject is subject as the human person, connected to his or her reality, and the subject of knowledge. And this has, of course, an epistemological trend. These trends can be recognized in several of the processes that are going on currently. The basic one is the speed of change. Many authors, many scholars, many thinkers have talked and written about the speed of change, the acceleration of the events in the present today, the contemporary present. One could say that there is a compression of time-space. Time is projected into the future, and space has been broken down, has been limited due to this hyperconnectivity, the same hyperconnectivity that allows me to be with you from a far distant geographic position. And all of this have made possible a collective intelligence, a shared intelligence. And this has opened space for an epistemic diversity, a diversity of epistemic approaches and patterns. And all of these have been described or defined as interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. But anyway, currently, technoscience has become a superstructure of contemporary society, to the point that it has been called society of knowledge. Of course, in parallel and closely connected to the epistemological trends, the economic trends, a globalization of the productive process, the integration of financial systems globally and simultaneously. The economic crises have taken the form of rapid cycles. Products are multifunctional. For instance, a computer is a multifunctional product. Labor has been deprofessionalized. The way that we knew labor, now and in the near future, much change in this regard. As I mentioned before, the centrality of technology has allowed and automation of production. So most of the products in these days, they are produced by uh, automated factories, and also this automation has become more and more uh, autonomous, not only as a part of a control system, but also as a part of conception system, such as artificial intelligence, as it is being called, the capacity of taking decisions and learning with the process of decision. And in all of these major global trend, knowledge has become the main asset, the main economic asset. And this is being called cognitive capitalism. And in the socio-political arena, of course, there are several perverse effects of these crises, these social, economic, and political crises. The relationship between state and market has been redefined, but in favor of the market and not in favor of the state. Uh, there has been a new form of imperialism, mostly by economic blocs and less by countries. And adjustment to fiscal austerity, which is part of the crisis of the welfare state with the withdrawal of public policies. And mostly in the social arena, racism and xenophobia and political individualism, all of these have been recognized as a new liberalism, but not neoliberalism, but a post or perhaps a hyper neoliberalism. And these global trends have been also described as part of it is dominant over other sections or other segments or other spaces of this globalization, which are subordinate. So when one could call subordinate globalization. And of course, there is a question of what is this subordinate globalization? Well, let me talk a little bit about this, because this has to do a lot with what is the the narrative regarding this globalization. So again, sharing the screen back to the issue of what is this subordinate globalization. There is a quite romantic approach to this by saying that there is a global that is good, and it has a local counterpart, which is also good. But this is a lot metaphorical. So many people talk about the global market, uh, saying that the world is now a small world thanks to technology, to the mobility, to the means of transportation. And we are all part of one planet, one society. This is metaphorical because the reality is quite harsh. So most poverty, especially at the local level, and the reality of that poverty is quite harsh. It's quite dramatic. And this is a painting by a Brazilian famous painter, Portinari, Cândido Portinari. It's a depiction of the refugees from the droughts that in the 30s, in the 20s, in the 10s, but also even today, they try to flee from the harshness of life and looking for better lives. But it's an approach to the spread misery, to the growing poverty. And when one could say that Brazil is a case of subordinate globalization, it's a case that's quite clear that it's a very divided society between those who have and those who have not. This is a photograph that became famous in Brazil because uh, one can see at the the side, one can see a quite clear uh, affluency. These are uh, apartments. Each of them has a swimming pool, and on the other side, it's total poverty. This is in São Paulo. This other picture is in my state, in Bahia. This is Salvador, the capital city of Bahia. Uh, this is the city park. It's like a cordon sanitaire, a sanitary barrier separating the affluency from the poverty. So we do have in Brazil a context, a social context that is quite complicated, a regressive tax regime, persistence of poverty, in economic inclusion, but also social exclusion, increase of inequities, precarization of labor, environmental challenges, and much violence and intolerance recently. And one could say that this has to do with a perverse education system, has to do in the sense that this system helps uh, to reproduce the social context. And so we need to talk about education. Education is, in our country, clearly a, a kind of a strategy, but also a complex of institutions that reproduces this inequity. And by talking into this topic, I think that we should take this premise. Education is a fundamental human right because it is the matrix of all the other rights, the one which is capable of promoting equity in modern societies. This is a quite old premise, quite old in the sense that from the Enlightenment, it inspired many of the changes, the political changes, and basically the French Revolution is taken as one of the landmarks, a historical landmark of this. This is the Marquis de Condorcet. Nicolas de Carita was his name. And he wrote 5 lessons regarding public instruction. And he also presented to the National Assembly in France right after the French Revolution a proposal of a project for a decree about the general organization of public instruction. That was the way that they called education by then. It was April 1792. And this is the beginning of this document. And the translation, gentlemen, to offer all individuals of the human species the means to provide their needs, to ensure their well-being, to know and exercise their rights, to understand and fulfill their duties, to guarantee each one the possibility of improving its craft, its life, empowering themselves, in order to establish among all the citizens a true equality, achieving the political equality recognized by the law. This must be the first objective of a national education, which, from this point of view, constitutes a duty of justice to the people. In Brazil, we have an intellectual hero. His name is Anísio Teixeira. He lived from 1900 to 1971. And he wrote many books. And in a few of them, he stressed quite clearly that the democracy has to be based on education. Public schools are the machine to make democracy, is a quote from him. So the corollary regarding university education or higher education, it is a requirement for enabling the human being to be a full citizen in democratic society. And I think that we should discuss preliminarily a distinction between functions of tertiary education from missions of university education. Functions of tertiary education is basically the what the French call the instruction, and in English also is instruction, the training of technical cadres, of people who are capable of applying and to use technologies, basically professionals and managers and some teachers. But also this tertiary education is the education of people to replicate established knowledges, which mostly are disciplinary knowledge and correlate technologies, but also the qualification of professional careers, which is accumulation of symbolic capital, but not creation. The missions of university education, the old historical mission of the university when it was conceived and implanted in Central Europe, in Western Europe, was the promotion of academic cultures, by then scholastic culture, then humanistic, after centuries, techno-scientific cultures, and most recently, ecological cultures. The second is the formation of intellectuals, knowledge producers or scientists, technology developers, critics, people who are capable of contesting accepted knowledge or accepted truth, and basically educators, which means promoters of culture, of science, of arts, of humanistic knowledge. And the universities also have the mission to create and produce knowledge, which is generation of symbolic capital instead of just application of symbolic capital. But recently, and the historical landmark could be May 1968, all over the world, a quite strong, quite creative cultural revolution, one could say that. When cultural criticism towards social transformation was taken as one of the missions, of the new missions of university education. And this implies general education, as in North America they call, but also in German, what is the old concept of Bildung, and also intercultural learning, which means the possibility of respecting, not only tolerating, the native knowledges, which means the knowledge which is not academic. And this implies intercultural learning. Okay, so let's go back to Brazil and try to apply some of these ideas. And my hypothesis is that in Brazil, institutions have the name of universities, but they have more performed training functions, which are vocational functions, than the university's historical missions. And other countries that happen too, but I think in Brazil is a special case because we do have an education system that is quite perverse. Well, this is a scheme that try to show that we, at the level of fundamental education, we have a majority, huge majority of public schools in municipal networks. Some of them are kind of like charter schools, and a few private schools. The public schools, of course, the financing is directly from the state. At the middle level or the high school level, we have still a majority of public schools, but in Brazil, middle level public schools, they belong to state networks, some technical schools, some charter schools, and a small number of private schools, most of them capable of preparing students for selective processes to get into the third level, the higher education level. And at this point, we have a perversion, which means simply that the preparation of students that are graduates from the private schools is so intense and high cost, of course, that they become more capable of passing the entrance exams to the public universities. So the majority of students in public universities, which in Brazil are for free, they come from private high schools. And that huge number of students, young people that have taken their high schools in public networks, they are not capable of competing. And so they are forced to go to private higher institutions, higher education institutions. Some of them university, but not many. And of course, the the degree of quality is quite differential between the two systems. And so it's a perversion, as I say, because uh, those who can pay go to free institutions, and those who are do not have the economic conditions, they have to uh, to be left to uh, private institutions which are paid, and that's why they have to take loans or to sacrifice, and many of them do sacrifice to complete their high schools, their higher education after coming from public high schools. So this is the prevailing system still, the structure of a kind of a quite unequal system. This unequal system has uh, a quite strange uh, a quite strange historical recent evolution. As you can see here, the old is the public higher education system. And this higher education system, they were almost even the distribution. But then, at some point in Brazilian history, especially the recent economic development, the of, of slots in private institutions, because then when the majority of the poor population got better economic conditions, they looked for higher education, and the private system was expanding, but not the public system. But that expanded, but at a lower pace. This is the composition of the public sector. Most of the slots, 62% of the slots, are in, and also the registration are in federal universities. A 30%, 31% in state universities and 6% in municipal universities. This is the higher education system in Brazil. Okay, so in sum, the state could be, as far as education is concerned, considered as a promoter of social inequalities. Education also can be considered as a source of reproduction of inequities, and higher education may be taken as a vector of domination and social exclusion. So just to recap, we had knowledge trends, economic trends. We came over some of the premises, the corollary, the preliminary. And this preliminary, we explore the 4 missions of the university. And I think that it's time to think about an agenda for changing this situation, not only at a national level, but also at a global level. And a proposal, and I'll be quickly addressing this issue, and finally, in an ideal situation. So if we try to think about this agenda for emancipatory higher education democratic societies for the whole world, not only for a place like Brazil, a country like Brazil, we should think that this agenda is an agenda for cognitive democracy. It's a complex and broad agenda, and we should select from this agenda to discuss the academic issues in this agenda, which is an agenda for the university and not only an agenda for the whole society. And one basic point is to recognize knowledge as an economic and geopolitical asset. And that's why knowledge has become so valuable and so sought for by all social classes. Second is to invest in disruptive technosciences, which is technologies and scientific knowledge that is capable to quickly change the state of affairs. Third is to create and foster innovative institutions. Of course, there is a whole dynamic of resistance and reaction to innovation, to what is new. To promote the idea, this is number 4, to promote the idea of universal education, not only higher education or higher vocational education, but the true meaning of the universal education. I could say the historical missions of the university. To value education for eco-social sensitivity, and to pursue a technological competence so important in these times, but a competence which is critical and not only a kind of adaptive competence. So let's talk about this new general universal education. In Confucian Chinese cultural matrix, it's called Tongxi. In the Western philosophy, it was called Bildung. And during the medieval times, we had the trivium and the quadrivium, which was the knowledge, the competence, the skills that every free citizen should have. And I could say it's, of course, trying to make a joke with the trivium, the quadrivium. I would say that now it's time for the pentavium. Of course, number 1, linguistic competence, which is the domain of at least one lingua franca, especially for science, English is lingua franca for many sciences, but other languages, defined by the area of knowledge and practice. The second one is the training in research, knowing how to produce new knowledge, reasoning skills, and interpretability. Some people have called analytical skills, but I could say that the analysis is one of these types of knowledge that we could also overcome and surpass into different directions. The number three is pedagogical competence, the idea that teaching skills are key in the contemporary world to share meaningful knowledge, to learn how to share. And this is the core of education is to share, to learn. Four, critical technological competence, which means understanding the means of practice, the fundamentals of how to do things, but also their implications. For instance, the implication of using technology, such as this one that allows us to connect. And number five, but not the least important, and perhaps the most important at this point, is eco-social sensibility, which means responsive listening, ethics, and respect for human diversity, but also for the planetary boundaries and limits. And this eco-social sensitivity, let's expand a little bit on this, is planetary consciousness. That idea that the local global is more complex than simply the territory, the world, the regional versus the international. The second issue of eco-social sensitivity is systemic responsibility. The idea that we are part of networks, we are part of systems, social systems, ecosystems, eco-social systems. Also the propensity to change, and also the respect for what is different. To change is to become different. And if someone is open to change, he or she is open to become different. And of course, it implies to respect what is different from that's human diversity. Also, transepistemic thinking, the capacity of thinking in a way different from the one that we have been raised in. Some authors have called this ecology of knowledges or the encounters of knowledges. And finally, solidarity and empathy, which is a strategy to overcome self-centered individualism. So this is an issue that has been discussed a lot, especially in terms of the question if or how the university could tackle this as a meaningful proposal. Bill Readings, he was a Canadian. He worked at the University of Montreal. I met him back in 1994, the year he died. He wrote a book that was published posthumously. And in that book, the title, The University in Ruins, he wrote this: in a global economy, the university can no longer be called upon to provide a model of community. And the appeal to the university as a model of community no longer serves as the answer to the question of the social function of the university. Rather, the university will have to become one place among others, where the attempt is made to think the social bond without recourse to a unifying idea, whether of culture or of state, which basically is the university must be open to society, open to history. But I'd like to end with a quote from a Brazilian scholar, one of the most powerful thinkers of Brazilian social theory. He was originally a geographer, Milton Santos. He died in 2001, and this year is the 20th anniversary of his death. And he wrote many books. The most famous is called Por uma Geografia Nova, which means for a new geography, which is a geography less physical and more social and more political. And about the universities, the Brazilian universities, he wrote, in Brazil, universities have reorganized themselves within the trilateral doctrine, according to which we are not supposed to be knowledge producers, which means that the university in the Northern Hemisphere, the universities in the US, in Canada, in Europe, and now in Asia, should be the universities allowed to be institutions fully entitled to produce higher level knowledge. And universities in subordinate countries, such as Brazil, would be allowed only to be replicators of knowledge. And this has been a key issue regarding the vaccine now, in the vaccines in plural, now in this pandemic situation. So continuing, Brazil is therefore a country where academic work does not bring intellectual rewards. He was complaining about that. And the universities entered reduced the possibilities of creation to the extent that they were built upon an authoritarian and bureaucratic scheme, which is the issue of university autonomy. Of course, he adds, we have the duty to disobey and go against this imposed destiny. And this concludes my summary, this brief approach to the issue that has been proposed by Rosa as a conclusion to this quite interesting course on history and philosophy of education. And I'd like to thank Rosa for inviting me to share with you some of these ideas, some of these reflections, and basically these critical approaches, because being critical is basically part of our mission as academics, as scholars. Thank you, Rosa, and I hope that this will help the discussion of these topics.